In 2023, Kenya Airways told the world exactly how it planned to kill off one of its most iconic aircraft types. Board approved, strategy locked in. The Embraer E190 was on its way out, for good. So why, in 2026, is the airline's own CEO talking about bringing in a brand new generation of Embraers? Something changed, and I will tell you about it in this video, so stick around to find out. If you are new, please subscribe to the channel. Prior to 2023, Kenya Airways was deep in survival mode. A decade of losses, a debt load that exceeded $1 billion, and a turnaround plan drawn up with the help of consultants at the Steer Group. Part of that plan was something called mono-fleeting, the idea that flying fewer aircraft types saves serious money. Shared spare parts, shared training, shared maintenance procedures. One playbook instead of three. And in that plan, the Embraer E190, a workhorse regional jet the airline had flown for years, was the odd one out. The airline's CEO at the time, Alan Kilavuka, said the Embraers were too small. The airline was chasing bigger, standardized Boeing-only narrow-body operations. Project Kifaru, the turnaround initiative, even had a name for this move, streamlining the fleet down from 36 aircraft to 27. On paper, it made perfect sense. Fewer aircraft types, fewer headaches, lower costs. Case closed, or so it seemed. Here's the twist. Kenya Airways began executing the plan. They sold off Embraers. They brought in more Boeing 737s and scheduled them on their high-demand Asian routes. These planes were perfect for their mature routes because they had a larger belly space. They could carry more passengers and swallow up all their luggage. This was good for their mature routes that demanded high-capacity planes. However, what the airline ignored at the time was that most of its connecting passengers traveled with a lot of luggage. Some of the passengers would occasionally connect to regional flights and would travel to destinations that the airline had not fully penetrated. This kind of travel brought a new problem to the airline. It had to decide whether it would make economic sense to schedule those high-capacity aircraft to carry a handful of passengers to domestic routes or stick with the low-capacity Embraer. Kamal explained it in this manner. On an Embraer, the airline can either carry 55 passengers with all their bags or 98 passengers, but only if each one brings just a single carry-on. In practice, that meant piles of luggage left behind on the tarmac, delayed bags, and furious customers standing at connection counters. Going bigger wasn't just a nice-to-have. It was becoming an operational headache the monofleet strategy hadn't fully accounted for. Now that the airline faced this dilemma, it had to rethink its decisions. The airline is still retiring most of its Embraers over time, still upgauging mature high-demand routes to Boeing 737s, but instead of a clean sweep, the strategy now has an asterisk. Kamal confirmed the airline will deliberately keep 4 Embraers on lease, specifically to open new, thinner routes where demand doesn't yet justify a bigger jet. Then came an even bigger signal. In December 2025, Kenya Airways requested government authorization to build a secondary hub at Kotoka International Airport in Accra, Ghana, and confirmed it would base Embraer E190s there to serve West African routes. And by June 2026, at the IATA AGM in Rio de Janeiro, Kamal dropped the biggest reveal yet. Kenya Airways was actively considering acquiring the Embraer E2, the next-generation successor to the very jet it had been trying to phase out just 3 years earlier. Let that sink in. The airline that once bet its whole narrow-body future on becoming all Boeing is now eyeing a newer Embraer. This isn't a company flip-flopping. It's a company that's no longer in survival mode. Back in 2023, Kenya Airways was cutting costs to stay alive. By 2024, it had posted its first profit in over a decade to 5.4 billion Kenyan shillings, roughly $42 million. With profitability came room to think differently. Route openers, thin regional connections, and West African expansion all need the right-sized aircraft, and that aircraft is often still the Embraer. There's also an unusually strong reason for Kenya Airways specifically to hold on to the type. Its own maintenance division is the only approved E-Jet service center on the entire African continent. That's not just a fleet asset, it's a business line. Turns out smaller and worse aren't the same thing. Sometimes the right size jet is a growth tool, not a liability. So, the real story here isn't Kenya Airways abandoning a plan. It's an airline learning in real time that a turnaround strategy built during a crisis doesn't always survive contact with a growing airline's actual network needs. Bigger jets solved a cost problem, but it took the smaller jets to solve a growth problem. New cities, thin routes, and a foothold in West Africa that Boeing 737s simply weren't built for. If you're into aviation stories, hit subscribe because we have other stories to share with you. And drop a comment. Should Kenya Airways go all in on the Embraer E2, or is this just a stopgap? I'll read the best ones in the next video.